Today's date is October 9th, 2020, which means that the 2020 presidential election is only 25 days away. It's almost here. November 3rd, 2020, mark that date on your calendars. We're in for a wild ride. This election is really important, probably the most important election of my lifetime because of how bad 2020 has been for all of us, how crazy of a year it has been, how much it has thrown at us with a pandemic, with a terrible economy just to begin with, as well as all the social unrest throughout the country. It is an insane year, probably the most chaotic year of my lifetime, and this election is going to be a pivotal election in the trajectory of the United States. Because whoever wins this election, they're going to have to figure out a way to solve all the issues that 2020 has thrown at us, whether it's Donald Trump or Joe Biden. But whoever gets elected, they're going to have to deal with all these issues, and are going to be in for a wild ride because these issues are not easy to fix. None of these issues that 2020 has thrown at us, they are not easy to fix. And that's kind of what I want to talk about in this video. More specifically, two major issues that this election will be centered around. Besides that though, the main point of this video is to talk about the state which I think will decide this election. What I mean by that is that whoever wins this state will win the entire election. So if Donald Trump wins this state, then he'll win the election. But if Joe Biden wins the state, he'll win the election. I would consider this state the bellwether state. And you already probably know which state I'm talking about. You can see the outline of that state on screen as well as in the thumbnail. It is the state of Wisconsin. Now, the issues I just talked about, more specifically the issue of COVID-19 and social unrest, these two issues are going to be what defines this election, this presidential election. And besides being the state which I think will decide this presidential election, I also think that the state of Wisconsin, in the just past couple months, in the past month in fact, has perfectly epitomized these two major issues of social unrest and COVID-19. To start off with, most of us have heard about what happened in Kenosha, Wisconsin around a month ago. I think at this point it's a bit more than a month ago. It was the shooting of Jacob Blake by a cop. A cop shot Jacob Blake 7 times, and as a result of this, there were lots of protests and a few riots in the state of Wisconsin, especially in the city of Kenosha where Jacob Blake was shot. This was not the end of the story though, because a couple days into these protests, you had this one 17-year-old named Kyle Rittenhouse travel from Illinois to Wisconsin, Kenosha, Wisconsin, to go to one of these protests. And at this protest, he shot 3 of the protesters at that protest. So on top of all the outrage that was already there over the shooting of Jacob Blake, there's a whole nother layer added to the situation when Kyle Rittenhouse showed up and killed 2 of those protesters and left the third one injured. So the state of Wisconsin, just as recently as 1 month ago, has experienced major social unrest. Besides the social unrest factor, Wisconsin is also the site of a major COVID-19 spike, probably the biggest one in the entire country as of now. If you just take a look at worldometers.com and go to the state of Wisconsin and look at the daily case count, you can see how big of a spike Wisconsin has had just in the last few days, in the last couple of weeks, compared to what it experienced in the spring and in the summer. The thing is that most other states had their biggest spikes either in the spring. States like New York, Delaware, Connecticut, New Jersey, Maryland, they all had their biggest COVID spikes in the spring, while states like Texas, California, Arizona, and Florida, they all had their biggest COVID spikes in the summer. But here, now you can see that, especially in the state of Wisconsin, but even in other states in that Midwestern area, such as the Dakotas, you can see that these states started experiencing major spikes in the daily COVID-19 case count in either late August or September. So states like North Dakota, South Dakota, and a few other states in that Midwestern area, such as Indiana as well. Out of every state in the United States though, Wisconsin is the state that is currently experiencing the worst COVID-19 spike in what I would call the third wave. I actually made another video on this topic about what I call America's third wave of the COVID-19 pandemic. Now, if you ask most trustworthy health experts, they will say that this entire pandemic up until now in the United States, it has all been part of America's first wave. But here's the thing, the definition of a wave is subjective. I talked about this in that other video. There's no set definition for what constitutes a wave. It's all subjective, it's all based on what people think counts as a wave. And some people can say that this is all one wave, but I look at it and I see that there was a distinct spike in the spring, another distinct spike in the summer, and you're probably going to see a third spike, although it might not be as big as the second one, in the fall. And I would consider that a wave. And because there's no set scientific definition for what constitutes a wave of a pandemic, I can just say that based on my subjective opinion that a certain period of time counts as a wave. Getting back to the main point of this video, Wisconsin, in just the past month and even up until now, has experienced both social unrest and widespread COVID 19. And like I said, these two factors are what will define this election. And these are the topics that are going to be at the forefront of the conversation for this presidential election. There are other topics that are going to be talked about, like climate change. That's always going to be a problem as long as that is an existential threat to planet Earth. But the main issues, the most important issues are number one, COVID 19, not only the pandemic and how to deal with it from a health perspective, but also the economic consequences of the pandemic and how to deal with the economy because you have many people across the country, millions losing their jobs, many are not able to pay their rent, many are getting evicted. A lot of people already have gotten evicted, and many more will likely get evicted in the near future. So that's also a giant issue that needs to be dealt with that is directly a result of the COVID 19 pandemic. So, Wisconsin perfectly epitomizes the biggest problems that 2020 has given us, and this is also the state that's going to decide the 2020 presidential election. So, I think that the state of Wisconsin, in my opinion, it's a state that you should really pay attention to in the next few weeks. See what happens with that state, both in terms of social unrest and in terms of COVID 19, because that'll really play a role in who wins this presidential election. If the people in that state think that Donald Trump has not done a good job handling both of these issues, they will likely vote for Joe Biden instead. And that's actually what seems to be happening. I've talked about this in my previous videos. Just in yesterday's video, I talked about the 13 Keys model, and I talked about how the economy, which is an extension of the COVID 19 pandemic's consequences, the economy and social unrest, those are two factors that went from being good, being in Trump's favor, to being in Biden's favor throughout the year of 2020. So these two factors are factors that are really important for this election, things you should definitely pay attention to. And more specifically, you should pay attention to these factors in the state of Wisconsin, because I genuinely think that this state will be what decides the election. In 2016, the only reason that Trump won the presidential election against Hillary Clinton was because he was able to win the states of Michigan, Wisconsin, and Pennsylvania. These are three states that Hillary Clinton thought would be easy wins for her, and she didn't really campaign there much. But in the end, Trump was able to edge out a win in all three of these states. But I think that, and I'm almost certain about this, that in the 2020 presidential election, in the upcoming election that is just over 3 weeks away, Joe Biden will, one, win the state of Wisconsin, and two, win the presidential election as a whole. Now here's the caveat. If Joe Biden does not win the state of Wisconsin, he will not win the presidential election either. Meaning that Donald Trump, if he wins the state of Wisconsin, he'll also win the entire presidential election. Basically, what I've talked about earlier in this video, the winner of the state of Wisconsin, the person who gets the most amount of votes in the state of Wisconsin, that person will be the winner of the entire presidential election. And as of now, I think that Joe Biden has around a 90% chance of winning the presidential election as a whole, as well as around a 90% chance of winning the state of Wisconsin. And you can take a look at 538.com. I've referenced that website several times on this channel. It's a really good website that has election prediction models, and it uses all sorts of mathematical formulas. It factors in many different factors when coming up with its projections. And I would say it was right on the dot for its 2016 election prediction when it gave Trump a 30% chance of winning that election on election day, the morning of election day. So I think that Joe Biden will most likely win Wisconsin and most likely win the presidential election as a whole. I just made a video a lot like this yesterday where I talked about the different factors that will either help Trump get reelected or help Joe Biden get elected. And based on the 13 Keys model, which takes a look at 13 different factors that affect the outcome of the presidential election, many of the factors were helping Joe Biden. More factors were helping Joe Biden than were helping Trump. And the factors that hurt Donald Trump more than anything were the factors of the economy, which is a direct extension of the COVID 19 pandemic, and the factor of social unrest. And these are the three issues that went from helping Trump at the beginning of 2020 to hurting Trump now in October of 2020. And that's exactly why I think that Trump's re-election chances went right down the drain from January to October. There's still a slight chance that he wins. That is definitely not out of the picture. You should be prepared for anything on election day. Anything can happen. If 2020 has taught us anything, nothing is out of the picture. I know I made that video yesterday saying that Joe Biden will win the presidential election as if I was really confident about it, as if I was 100% sure. But the truth is, I'm only 90% sure that Joe Biden will win this election. Nothing is out of the picture. I just made that video title for clickbait. Sorry about that, but nothing is out of the picture. Trump can still win, but despite saying that, Joe Biden has a much, much better chance of winning the 2020 presidential election. The issues of social unrest and COVID 19, these are the issues that caused Trump's re-election chances to go right down the drain, and these are the issues that made Joe Biden's chance of getting elected really, really good. With COVID 19, you have America having 20% of the world's COVID 19 cases, despite only being 4 to 5% of the world's population. So, in terms of its population size, it's not doing well with COVID 19. And you also have the issue of social unrest, where you've had lots of protests all across the country in the past few months. And I think one of the big issues with Trump is that, in terms of his rhetoric, he's really good at appealing to his base. He's really good at firing up his base. But the problem with that is that at times you could just alienate everyone else. Trump's rhetoric is a really interesting thing because I genuinely believe that it was one of the biggest reasons why Trump won the 2016 presidential election, but I also believe that it's one of the biggest reasons why Trump will lose by quite a bit to Joe Biden in the 2020 presidential election. I think the difference between 2016 and 2020 is that there were no major crises in 2016, but there was the pandemic in 2020 and you had social unrest in 2020. And when you have major crises like those two, having divisive rhetoric that only appeals to a certain fraction of the population while alienating everyone else, that does not make things better. It just makes more people want to go away from you and go more towards your opponent. So I think that in 2016, his rhetoric was right on the spot in terms of campaign strategy and in terms of getting himself elected. But I think that's ultimately what his downfall was in 2020. The only thing we can really do now is sit back and see how these last 25 days play out until Election Day, and then see how the few days after Election Day will play out, because not every vote will be counted on Election Day, most likely, because of the mail-in ballots. It's going to take a few extra days after Election Day for every vote to be counted because of all the mail-in ballots. So one possibility is that Trump wins on Election Day, but not after every vote is counted up, which I'm honestly really scared for. I've talked about this before on this channel. That's kind of what happened in 2000 when it took several weeks for every vote to be counted up. And even in 2000, when there was no major crisis in the country, you had all sorts of division between Bush supporters and Gore supporters. But with the kind of year that 2020 has already been, I can only imagine how divisive and how heated things could get in the scenario that I just talked about. I hope that does not happen. I hope that the true winner of this election can be determined quickly, but we just have to wait and see. The election is only 25 days away, and we're in for a wild ride.